Welcome everybody to our informational meeting for the Sioux Falls City Council. Today is the 21st of June, Tuesday, and welcome to everybody who's in the City Council chambers, along with our full council and anyone watching on TV, Channel 16, etc. We will move right into our a report from our Public Service Committee.
Yes, thank you.
Erickson.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm still getting situated. Public Services met and we discussed infrastructure management services. Oh, wait, no, I'm looking at the wrong paperwork. That's what we're doing today. We discussed the subdivision access. We talked about how this might impact home builders, how this might impact home prices potentially. There were speakers from the administration as well as the home builders. We've discussed taking it back to IRAB, just having the final ordinance written. We did review it. Heath Hoftheiser was also here, and he talked about really the reason and the threshold for when a secondary access would be required. And it is a scientific number based on trips per either a high density or low density. And so it's not just throwing darts at a map. It's really making sure we have those numbers figured out. And so we discussed that. We had good dialogue back and forth, and that should be coming forward to the council here in the next month or so, based on additional comments from home builders as well as other groups. The concern is what it could do potentially to house prices. I will say this is really a worst case scenario, and it's really just a just in case if there is somebody that decides to not follow through with the plan. What I do like about this ordinance is it does allow discretion of our directors that they can make adjustments and changes. So that's where we are with that. It's been almost 2 years that we've been discussing this particular topic, and so I appreciate all the feedback we had from traffic as well as Director Cooper and his group as well. We also had the fire marshal here discussing emergency access as well. We have a new group of people in public services, and so welcomed everyone for that and discussed any potential topics coming up in the future. And right now we don't have a lot on our agenda. And that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Good meeting. I know I was there, and it's good to get started and bring some things up. We've had some long discussions on that particular topic over the last couple of years, and so it's good to get some of that finalized. Okay, City Council open discussion. Open discussion. Councilor Staley.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to just mention a little bit about law enforcement today. This morning I had an opportunity to stop by McDonald's and visit with the police officers there. They were doing coffee with a cop. And I thought it was a very positive experience, the way they were greeting the public in a non-emergency situation. I had a nice visit with Sergeant Flagstead. And I wanted to say bravo to Chief Burns for supporting this outreach and continuing on with doing this for our public. As some of you know, I went out last weekend for several hours with my Neighborhood Watch brochure. Some of you, I gave that to all the council members that our multimedia service put together. And I know that Councilor Erpenbach, you used to be involved with this as well, right? Neighborhood in your, yes. And it's, I went into a northern neighborhood that's had some problems with crime. It was very rewarding to reach out to these people. And I think it's a fabulous thing for our community. I started mine 20 years ago, and through the years, we've had 30 to 40% participation when we do things. I do a picnic every year. And so I'm hoping that as we move forward with this, that we're going to be encouraging to neighborhoods, even if they have 30%, 40%, 50% participation, because any amount of caring, even if you're 2 houses apart, means a lot. And I'll tell you, when we pass out our flyers, we have about 70 people in our group, and the people who aren't participating, when they get our flyer that says the police department's coming in, we're having our picnic, we care, that still speaks huge volumes to them about what's happening with neighborhoods and with us within our neighborhood. So I'm looking forward to seeing this program prosper, and just wanted to give that little report.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other open discussion? Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. I just wanted to highlight, and now I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm unable to get Cyrus, so if I say something wrong, I apologize. But I just wanted to highlight item 14 and item 38 on tonight's agenda. Item 14 is an annual retail malt beverage license for a new organization in Sioux Falls, the Sioux Falls Pilots LLC, which is a wood bat baseball league that's going to play at Augustana, which sounds great. Then item 38 is the one-day beer licenses that they will use the beer license that's owned by the American Legion, so that they will do one-day beer licenses, because this one, the annual one, isn't going to be done in time. And so we're going to do a couple things with the pilots team. I bring all of this up because I am going to pull item 14 off the consent agenda, and I'm going to ask us to vote separately on item 38, because there has been concern from the Augustana neighborhood about selling beer right there in their neighborhood. The reason I was looking at Sire, and I'm finally getting it, I'm hoping that their security plan is attached to Sire now. I'm not sure that it is. I got it by email today. If you're interested in seeing it, they're doing all the right things in terms of selling it in the right place and stopping sales at, up to a certain period of time, so that people aren't walking out as drunk as they might have been, those sorts of things. But I just wanted the council to hear, and then those folks in that Augustana neighborhood to hear, that these folks are trying to do the best that they can, but we are going to talk about them separately. So I just wanted to toss that out for the team today.
Thank you for the heads up, Councilor. Anything else from anyone? Okay, I would like to call forward Mike Cooper to visit a little bit about a couple items on tonight's agenda for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services. I wanted to let people know ahead of time about some requests that staff will be making tonight regarding the City Council agenda. And I'm pretty sure that the council is aware of these, but in case anybody is tuning in ahead of time, just to let them be aware of what we're going to be requesting tonight. Items 39 and 52 are pertaining to annexation of land at 57th and Southeastern. It's the horse farm owned by Riders. We're going to be requesting that both of those items be deferred to the July 5th City Council meeting, and that's merely to accommodate the owner and the owner reps' schedules. Item 48 will be presenting first reading of a rezoning at 6th and Bonson, and we're going to be requesting on behalf of the developer, the applicant, to set the date of second reading and public hearing for now September 13th. September 13th. There was a directive that it was going to be September 6th, and just this afternoon we received a correspondence from the developer asking for it to be September 13th. Apparently September 6th is the first day of school. It's hard to that we're already thinking about that, so staff will be making that request tonight on behalf of the applicant. And then lastly, item 53 is a pre-annexation agreement for property at 69th and Southeastern. And again, to accommodate the owners and their legal counsel, we would like to request that that be deferred to July 5th, which they are in support of as well. So I just wanted to make sure people knew about those ahead of time.
Appreciate it very much for that information. Any questions for Mr. Cooper? Yes, Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks so much. Item 48, the one that's being deferred to September 13th, that is one that we have heard testimony on, even though it hasn't been on the agenda for the last 2 weeks in a row. There have been times when we have done press releases saying that we know for sure we're going to either withdraw or defer something. Does that group of folks understand that this is there's not opportunity for input tonight?
That's
they know that?
Part of my reason for doing this today. I know that the developer applicant has been meeting with some representatives of the neighborhood and that they are aware that that will be the request to the City Council tonight.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm not sure how extensive that message has been communicated as of right now. So that's why I'm attempting
I will
that.
let the mayor know when he comes in so that he can make the audience aware of it.
And again, we're requesting this. It's up to the City Council to decide what you want to do with it tonight. Thank you.
Anything else? Let's see, there was none other from here. I I would ask Mark Cotter to come up and visit a little bit about transfer of appropriations in tonight's agenda. Some explanation you wanted to give?
Thank you, Council Chair. Yes, earlier today, Council Chair asked if we would provide just an explanation on how that, on tonight's agenda, it's called item 55, how does that work? And so I did, we did a couple of pictures to show you how we essentially do this. I'll probably first start out with showing you that there's two key projects that we use that are in your capital book, and I'll just show you the first two. That's page 42 and page 177. If Jim would be so kind. And so that, as you start to use your capital book, it starts out with the name of a project and then the total project cost over a 5-year period. It gives you the description of where those funds are used, the justification. Ultimately comes down to the expenditures, and so the expenditures on the left show you that we're going to need dollars here for engineering, reconstruction, and utilities. The funding sources then below show that they are sales tax, user fees, and sanitary sewer. Those two numbers from the expenditures and funding sources have to match, okay? And then there's a second.
There are two numbers in accounting that match?
There are, Council Chair,
Oh,
yes.
and Tracy's not here to get that.
He drives this program,
Okay.
so. And then if we can switch to the other one, I'll just give you a picture of what that other one is. That one's called Citywide Water Main Replacement, and we've really extended how many water mains that we'll replace, and it's in, you know, we've studied the asset, we've studied where the breaks are happening, and we certainly want to reduce people's outage time. And so we've significantly funded this over the course of the last 4 years, and this year alone will impact just over 11,000 feet of replacing water mains in our core neighborhoods. Same thing here. There's a total project cost that's expected to be spent over a 5-year period. There's a description, there's a justification, and you'll see this on every project that's in your capital book. There's an expenditures where here again we're going to be talking about engineering, construction, reconstruction, and then down below those are the funding sources to ultimately get this work done. Now let's go to just two particular projects that are on item 55 tonight. I'll first show you the cover page to a typical set of plans that gets designed for projects to go out to contractors to bid on. So you'll see at the top, and I know this is a 11 by 17 sheet, so we'll just somewhat move it around, but it starts out with citywide water main replacement. This one happens to be over by John Morrell by the street campus. There's 3 blocks that we're going to improve. There's a vicinity map on the upper left to orientate you. There's a close-in map on the center. Again, this is what a contractor picks up and ultimately fills out all their bid tabs to submit their bid on. Okay, then if you go to the next page, we'll show you how this particular one works out. So when we can, the majority of the time, we really do try to coordinate any street improvements with utility improvements, because we certainly don't want to be there after, and if at all possible, we don't want to be there before. But inevitably, if the water line is showing a break history and the street surface is good, we don't want that to be the limiting factor of moving forward. And so this particular one, we have to go and remove half the street for the water main, and the water main is really the driver on this project. The street surface in this case was in need of repair. We didn't want to leave the other side and only improve one side. And so on this particular one, the team works through, we have a criteria of what does water pay for and what does sales tax pay for. And just tried to be simplistic here. In this particular breakdown, the water user fees pay 70%, sanitary user fees qualify on this one as 13%, and sales tax is 17%. Essentially, on the left-hand side of that road, we're leaving the curb in. The reason we're going to have to do that excavation, remove that pavement, it's driving the project is the water main, so water main funds will pay for that. On the other side, that mill and overlay to improve that side of the street, the right-hand side of the street, sales tax pays for that. Okay, let's go through one more, and then we'll just show you the transfers that are planned tonight. So another small neighborhood water main improvement. This one is under 2016 city water main replacement. This is in the southwest part of the city. It's on South Drexel and Danbury Drive. There's an equivalent of probably about 5 blocks of road that will be improved in this area. The pavement condition on this is very good, but not the water main. And so we'll now go to the street. And so in this particular area, the only reason we need to remove about 1/3 of the street is specific for the water main. And so water funds fund those removals, the new water main, and ultimately that pavement restoration to accomplish the water main work. This particular project, there was some curb and gutter that was not needed to be removed and replaced for the water main, but our street team comes in and says, we've got some settled curb. We want to accomplish this while you're there, and so that's why you'll see some sales tax funds are used in this particular project. So, but on this particular one, water fees are paying 87%, sanitary sewer user fees are paying 5%, and sales tax is 8%. And then just last, we can just bring up item 55, and you'll see a number of transfers that occur. One of the things that we've really adopted is programs. And so in this particular project, this first one, there is a funding need for the top 3 lines in water, water reclamation, and water sales tax. And then where those dollars come from is below. And you'll see that we are pulling dollars from those pooled projects. First one is citywide water main replacement. And since we've colored them today just for easy following, $50,000 in that particular project from water. Then we went to core neighborhood reconstruction and transfer out of that particular program to fund the project, $350,000, and so on. So in this particular breakdown, the top 3 items are the items we need to fund, and then the bottom 5 is where we'll get the funding from. And then if we can flip over to the back page, that goes to that other project that's in the southwest part of the city. Again, very specific that the top 3 items here are what we need to fund, and then the bottom 4 is ultimately where we got that funding from to fund those projects. One of the things you'll see in our capital plan is that we are actively designing a number of projects. And so we then have pooled projects. So you'll see projects like asphalt rehabilitation, and they're general in nature. But once we actually specifically identify a project like this particular one, Drexel Drive, we create a new CIP for that, and then we take dollars from the pooled project and fund the specific project. Okay, it gives you flexibility because one of the things we could do is if we had all these specific projects that we could get out there and have a right-of-way issue. We could have something that delays the project and ultimately somewhat ties up those funds. And we want to be able to execute the capital plan. That's our job. That's what you've assigned us to do. And so having the pooled projects, and then as you look at your monthly breakdown on your financial report that you get from Director Turbach, you'll be able to see the top will start at a pooled project, and then down below them are all the very specific projects that get generated. You'll see these funding transfers on a weekly basis. They are just a notice, but understand council leadership had a question, and we wanted to be able to provide you today just some basis for it and a picture for it. So,
Okay. Thank you. Any questions? Councilor Staley.
Yes, and actually, I had, could you leave that up there, Mark? So when I was looking at this, I wanted to ask for some clarity, because when I was looking on the back page and it says water and sales tax there to fund a bid award, that I wanted to explain to me why we were having those 2 next to each other. And then when you come down, you're looking at those first 3, And then you're saying that those first three are really what's needed, and then the last three is what's funding that?
That's right. That's the specific project. So you'll see the description on top. It says Drexel and Danbury Avenues.
Right.
And those are three. And then down below it says core neighborhood reconstruction, outfall sewer rehabilitation, and then sanitary sewer, other mains. And so those were those are the dollars that ultimately roll up to fund those top three. And there becomes a very direct nexus between if a water project is driving the project, or if a street surfacing project is driving it, or if they're out there working together. And we really have those three situations on a frequent basis. That's why we've tried to make this crystal clear on how those funds fund ultimately the projects.
Well, and yeah, to me, going forward, it would be nice if the first one, Drexel, the water main replacement, would match down below where it says core neighborhood reconstruction, that those two would actually be the same. Or if needed, if you need to separate the two on the top, have it correlate to it down below. Just to say, this is sales tax, this is fees.
Those two particularly do. And so it starts out with $885 at the top, and then down below shows you that we'll take $110,000 from core neighborhood reconstruction and $775,000 from outfall. Those two together net out your water needs. The green is sanitary sewer, and again, we just color-coded this for graphical purposes today. And then down below, where will we get that? Sanitary sewer, other mains is another programmed project. And then last, the sales tax. And so there's always a direct nexus of what the funding need is and where the funding comes from.
Do you ever use the word enterprise funds when you're talking about this too? Do you put that in here, or it just says water?
Well, they're synonymous in the midst.
It always, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Water, wastewater, landfill, and light and power are the enterprise funds that we manage.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Other questions for Mark? Thank you, Mark. That helps. And for the new counselors especially, don't be afraid to call Mark, because I know this blows your mind at first, as I said, and so don't be afraid to call him. Get explanations, because he's happy to do it, or someone on his staff would be happy to help you. Okay, let's move on to our presentations and infrastructure management. I think you're back up, Mark. And IMS presentation.
All right, we did bring some table weights if anyone would like one of them later. So. All right, good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. This is a study that we've been working on for some time, and really proud to bring in a third-party, very professional, very well-respected firm that's infrastructure management services. They specifically are a pavement management consulting firm that aid agencies across the country in assessing what their pavement conditions are and then helping them evaluate what the best maintenance and budgetary plans are. Just for some perspective, in the past we would send out a team of people to visually inspect roads, and then we had a form that we had them the teams fill out that would annotate all the respective pavement condition issues, whether it's cracks, potholes, alligators, rutting. There's about 10 different categories that they would check, and then ultimately all those sheets would come back in. It would get input into a pavement management software. Out of that software was a pavement condition index, and so it gave us a perspective on a scale of 1 to 10 what our pavement conditions were by segment. And when I say by segment, that's by block. One of the things that we've really taken away with going to a new third party is that our scale now, instead of 1 to 10, is 1 to 100. And IMS actually comes in. They don't go out there just with people. They actually go out there with high-tech vans that are equipped with lasers and cameras, and they go out there to ultimately document what the pavement fatigue is, rutting, cracking, potholes, roughness, joint smalls, and more. And again, just using state-of-the-art, very efficient technology that once they capture it, in a matter of weeks, we can get that information back and then really start to work with them on how to use it. You know, one of the questions we've got, and we got it even earlier this year, is how do you select the streets that you work on? You know, one of the items that council leadership asked us to bring tonight was our 2016 construction map. And that's there, and if you have any questions, our team is here to answer those as well. But really it starts with having a team of people that focus on pavement management strategies, to not focus on the worst first, but really focus on how do we extend the life and maximize the life of our street network. Our engineering and street maintenance teams work hand in hand together as they are identifying, designing, and then ultimately deploying those strategies. Knowing your condition really helps you identify, prioritize, and select the right surface treatment and budget for those necessary improvements. The street network is the single largest city asset that we're entrusted to manage, and it's valued at nearly $1 billion and has nearly 800 center line miles. There's a couple items that you're going to hear today duplicate, but we do want to just emphasize them, is that the City of Sioux Falls overall pavement condition index number is a 70. The other measurement of the health of your network is how much backlog, how many streets are in the poor or very poor state. And remember, we talk about this new rating scale that we have now with IMS, and that's essentially a backlog street is anything that rates a 40 or lower. The IMS has advised us that you want to, as an agency, you want to have 12% or less in your backlog, because those are really beyond normal maintenance. They're either in the reconstruct or the partial reconstruct. That benchmark was set at 12%. The City of Sioux Falls backlog is at 4%. So we're in very good shape from a condition standpoint on that end. The other side of the scale, how many excellent streets do we have? Again, they have a benchmark for that. They said an agency wants to have 15% or more, and ours came in at 20%. So the overall pavement condition of 70%, having a backlog of only 4%, and an excellent streets of 20%, really gave us a good analysis, third party from them. It did confirm that the team's been doing a very good job with the strategies and the previous approach, and now with IMS we can really take off and utilize this next information. We'll do a little bit deeper dive now with the information. We have a gentleman from IMS, Zach Thomason. Zach has been with IMS for 10 years. They're a company that's been open for over 30. They have over 500 clients across the country, and we're proud to be one of them. And right now I'd like to bring forward Zach Thomason. Zach?
Welcome, Zach.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
There you go, sir.
All right, perfect. I appreciate it. Mr. Mayor, Council, I certainly thank you for having me here today. And again,
Let me correct you, I'm not the mayor. Oh, and I have no intentions of ever becoming it. There may be others in this room who do, but I do not. I am just the chair, but thank you anyway.
Mr. Council Chair, I certainly appreciate you having me here today.
No problem.
Again, my name is Zach Thomason with IMS, and we're the firm that assessed the pavement condition here in the City of Sioux Falls. So today I'm going to brief you on the 2016 state of the road network here in the city. Let's first start with the scale of investment and understand how much pavement we really own. City of Sioux Falls, roughly 173,000 people, maintains and owns roughly 780 centerline miles of road. That's a lot of pavement. It equates to about 17 million square yards of pavement, which makes it the single largest asset that the city maintains. And this asset is valued at $1.16 million per mile for a total aggregate of just over $900 million. Very close to $1 billion asset that the city maintains. And that does not include the value of the land. That's just the pavements and the striping, some sidewalks, but the value of the land is not included in that value. A quick early look at the condition score. The average PCI score, that's the pavement condition index for the city, was a 70. That index is a 0 to 100 scale that ranks the health of a road. So 0 is very bad, 100 is a perfectly brand new road that was paved yesterday. 70 is a very good score. Unfortunately, the PCI score does not operate like grades, so a lot of folks may look at this and think, well, 70 is a C minus. Doesn't quite work that way. 70 is actually an excellent number, and I'll show you why and how that relates to other communities here in the next few slides. The city's backlog was at 4%. Backlog is the big ticket work. This is the full reconstruction and partial reconstruction candidates that are done throughout the city. So it's the expensive work that is done, and we call those the very poor and poor roads. So at 4%, the city is certainly in a healthy position, as generally a healthy agency will have a backlog below 12%. Now, the concept of pavement management is really a balanced approach of 3 specific ingredients. It starts out with city-specific objectives and city-specific level of service policies, as well as existing city budgets. On top of that, we need to roll in existing conditions. We cannot plot a course forward until we know where we stand. So consider the condition data a baseline for the existing conditions in the city. And lastly, we also want to roll in city-specific priorities as well as pavement and good cost-benefit pavement management priorities as well. But why do pavement management? The purpose of pavement management is actually very simple. It's far more cost-effective to maintain an asset over its life than it is to let it deteriorate over time. So as you can see in that chart there, that red line represents the typical deterioration of a road. And in the first 40% of a pavement's life, it may only have a 15% drop in quality. But in the next 15% of that pavement's life, it's going to have a 40% drop in quality. So that's that steep part of the curve, or that cliff, so to speak, that we talk about. It certainly behooves us to maintain the pavements in good condition rather than letting them deteriorate over time. So we can spend $1 now maintaining roads in good condition, or we can spend $8 later rebuilding them. And also, there's a right time and a right place and a right treatment to apply on a typical road. So you'll see that dotted line there in the middle is that same typical pavement deterioration curve. The goal and the role of pavement management is to target roads at the right time. So that gray zone there, that target zone, are roads that score between on the low end of a 65 and roads that score on the high end of an 85. That is the optimal time to touch these roads and apply rehabs at the lowest cost with the greatest cost benefit. Now, some tools we use to rate the streets, that's the Laser Road Surface Tester. That is a van-based platform that is equipped with high-speed lasers, GPS technology, and HD cameras. Its job was to assess the surface condition of the road. So it counted cracks as it drove the roadways, as well as measured cracks by width and depth. It measured things like rutting and roughness and potholes. The job was the surface defects of the pavement condition. And we followed a standard set of protocols that are developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to do so. Now, we talked a little bit about the pavement condition index, and I mentioned there's a right time and a right place to apply specific treatments. This chart kind of shows you a few of those. If you look at the very good roads, those are roads between a PCI score of a 70 and an 85. These are excellent candidates for a surface treatment, such as a slurry, a microsurface, or a chip seal on the asphalt roads, with certainly some localized remove and replace, crack seal, and joint sealing on the concrete roads. But if we jump down the chart a little bit, poor roads, those are roads between a 25 and a 40. These are roads that require something more substantial. They need a heavier treatment. So these roads are good candidates for thick overlays to partial reconstruction candidates like surface removals on the asphalt roads. And certainly the concrete roads are good candidates for extensive panel replacements and grinding. And we've talked about PCI, but let's take a look at what it looks like in the field. These are the excellent roads between an 85 and 100. They are in like-new condition with very few minor distresses. They result in a smooth ride and very good drainage. These roads should provide 5 to 10 years prior to the first rehab with some routine maintenance. The very good roads, these are between a 70 and an 85 on the PCI scale. They have very few distresses, no rutting, and no base failures on these roads. So these are excellent candidates for crack seal with a surface treatment on the asphalt roads, joint reseal, and localized rehab on the concrete roads. These maintain the existing drainage, and they extend the pavement life at the lowest cost. You get the biggest bang for your buck by capturing these roads in their need year. The good roads between a 60 and 70, these are roads that have few localized distresses with minimal base failures. Now, if we had noticed that this road was distressed due to load-associated distresses, meaning the distresses caused by the pounding of traffic, alligator cracking, rutting, and potholes, this would be an excellent candidate for a thin overlay. However, if it's not exhibiting any of those load-associated distresses, it's a great candidate for a surface treatment as well. So there's some other data that plays a part in the rehab selection. These have an extremely great cost benefit, just like the very good roads did. It results in thinner strategies that are applied to the road, less crown buildup on our roadways, less intrusive rehab to the citizens, and it also maintains the existing drainage. Now, the fair roads between a 50 and 60, these are roads that do have progressive cracking. We start seeing a few base failures in these roads, and they do have localized distresses. These roads represent an optimum timing for a thin to moderate overlay or a slight panel replacement on the concrete routes. And there's a lot of benefits to selecting these streets as well. There's an early lower cost, which results in a greater return because there's less grinding work to do in the field and less drainage work to replace. The poor to marginal roads between a 25 and a 50, these are roads that do have localized base failures, rutting at intersections, a lot of cracking, and a lot of patching. These are simply tired streets that are due for a thicker overlay and possibly a surface removal in the field on the asphalt routes. Concrete roads, they're simply due for certainly extensive joint and moderate panel replacements. These are a high priority to avoid reconstruction. So as we did the assessment, we actually classified roads as critical and non-critical. Critical roads are roads that need to be captured now to avoid a costly cost of deferral, meaning if we defer this road too long, it's going to cost us exponentially more later. So it behooves us to capture it now, and we can save dollars moving forward by capturing those. And there were some roads in the poor to marginal category that we categorized as critical through the assessment. The very poor roads, these are between a 0 and a 25. These are the roads that do have base and structural failures. They have rutting on them, and they do have excessive cracking. These roads are far past the point of overlay-based rehabilitation. They are full reconstruction candidates. They're often the source of citizen feedback, and safety does become a concern at a very low PCI as potholes start to form more frequently. Let's take a look at some of the data here. This is a PCI distribution chart with the PCI in increments of 10 on this scale. So the red bars is the City of Sioux Falls current condition. The blue line is the typical distribution. If we look towards the left-hand side of this graph, we'll see that the blue line is far above the City of Sioux Falls red bars. What this tells us is that the city has less backlog or less roads below a 50 than we would expect to see for an average agency. The other thing to note on this graph too is that typically we see this bell curve center at about the 60 to 70 range for a typical agency. Sioux Falls is actually is skewed a little bit to the right and centered in the 70 to 75 category. So we're certainly in very good condition. Now, if we take that same graph, so I'm going to take the same distribution chart, but I'm going to group it into descriptive terms. So these are the same descriptive terms that we just rolled through for the PCI images. Here, there are 3 metrics we use to assess the overall health of any agency. The first is the network average PCI score. Sioux Falls scored a 70. Right now, nationwide, we're seeing the average between a 60 and a 65, so the city is certainly well above average on that metric. The second metric, went a little too fast there. The second metric we have is backlog. Again, the city's backlog is at 4%. It's an excellent number. Generally, a healthy agency will be below 12%. As agencies start acquiring backlog in the 15 to 20% range, it very quickly becomes unmanageable, meaning we can't influx enough capital into the system to ever catch up with the big ticket work. So the city being in such great shape on the on the backlog side is fantastic. So it certainly behooves us to keep the backlog in good condition. It's very easy to let backlog slide and creep up. It's very difficult to reduce backlog and very costly. The last metric I'd like to point out is the percent of excellent roads. Generally, we like to see a minimum of 15% of the roadway network with a PCI score greater than an 85. Sioux Falls came in just over 20%. What this tells us is that the city has been reinvesting in the pavement network somewhere close to the steady state requirement. And we can see that right there in the data right off the bat. Let's talk about the methodology we used in terms of the pavement analysis. We recognize that funding is not $0, nor is it unlimited. We have finite dollars that we have to spend on the road network, and we need to maximize those dollars as greatly as possible. We recognize the city places a value on its roadway network, the arterial, the collector, the local routes. But we also want to identify an annual budget that maintains the existing condition, the PCI of a 70, and the backlog of 4%. We also want to examine the current effects of the current funding level and see how that affects PCI in the long run as well. So we want to prevent deterioration in pavement quality. We didn't include any ADA compliance in these numbers that I'm going to show you, so there's no ADA compliance or sidewalk rehab. This is strictly related to the pavements. And pavement management is priority-based, not worst first. So we don't simply line up the roads from highest PCI score to lowest and attack at the bottom. Think of your roads like the car that you drive on a daily basis. You fully intend to change the oil and flush the coolant simply because you want to maximize the life of the vehicle. We don't just drive them until the engine drops. And that's the purpose of pavement management and preventative maintenance on our street, is to get as much life out of our roads as possible at the lowest cost. And there's no cost of inflation in some of these budgetary numbers here. What you're seeing here is a 5-year budget analysis. So you'll see several budget scenarios. We actually ran upwards of 20. The top line there that skews all the way to the top of that chart is the fix all budget. Meaning if someone wrote the City of Sioux Falls a blank check to go out and fix all roads in like new condition, that number would be on the order of $240 million. We also identify the floor of the graph. So that's the do nothing scenario. What happens to our network if we spend $0 over a 5-year horizon? And we can see the condition slides very rapidly from a 70 downward of a 61 in as short as 5 years. That red line that you see there that's fairly steady, that's your steady state analysis. Those are the funds needed to maintain the existing condition, the existing network average condition of a 70 and backlog at 4%. So that's the proposed 2017 through 21, $16 million a year dedicated to the pavements. Now the green line that you see there is the city's existing budget at $13.9 million. And we can see that for the first year and a half, it trends very closely to the steady state analysis. But as we start looking out further, 4, 5, and even 10 years, we realize that the existing budget of $13.9 million is not enough to arrest the decline of PCI and the increase in backlog as well. So what we're looking at here is the cost of equity removal. Our pavements are an asset. So again, it is very important that we maintain that asset, because as the asset deteriorates, we're literally removing equity from the system. So a couple things I want to point out. You have a starting PCI of 70, and based on that, we can identify a $13.6 million cost to increase per PCI point, should the PCI drop. So what we see here on the far right-hand side of that chart is the steady state analysis, meaning if we fund the $16 million to the road program and maintain the existing conditions, there's zero equity lost. We've maintained the asset in its existing condition. At the $13.9 million budget, we can see the PCI drops a point over a 5-year horizon. The cost to replace that point is $13.6 million, and the total 5-year cost over the steady state budget is $3.1 million. So if you look at that on an annual basis, it's an inefficiency on the order of about $630,000 simply because we're losing equity in our asset. Also, I've gone ahead and plotted the worst first scenario. Folks always ask, well, why don't we simply attack the worst roads and work our way up? It's simply not efficient, because as we're busy tackling the big ticket work, we're also letting the good roads slide. And it's far more cost effective to maintain the roads in good condition while also whittling away at the backlog at the same time. So we have to prioritize. So in terms of the worst first approach, we lose even greater ground on the order of about 1.5 points in PCI over 5 years, which results in a cost of $8.8 million over the steady state budget run. So again, that results in about a $1.7 million annual inefficiency if we did things on a worst first type of approach. So again, long-term underfunding of rehab and maintenance is the direct equivalent of removing equity from an asset. Eventually, it has to be repaid through total reconstruction. Our goal is to maximize the life of the road as much as possible. So we would certainly recommend maintaining the PCI at or above a 70 with a backlog of 4% for the entire roadway network. This equates to a budget of $16 million annually dedicated to pavement rehabilitation alone. The current budget of $13.9 million will achieve a PCI score of 69 over the next 5 years with a backlog increase to 5%. We would certainly recommend the use of a full suite of rehabilitation strategies that are reviewed on an annual basis to update the unit rates in the pavement management plan. And a prioritized approach based on the cost of deferral or cost benefit is far more cost efficient than doing things on a worst first approach. Using worst first would lose an additional $1.1 million per year in lost equity in the system. And lastly, the city should certainly resurvey their streets every few years to update the pavement condition data and the rehab program. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mark.
Thank you, Zach. All right, just a couple slides to close, and then we'll take questions with some conclusions. The comparison of how our streets network relates to other cities has been very beneficial to this, because one of the things we do anytime we look globally, whether it's rates, whether it's our street condition, is how do we compare to other peer cities. Using an independent national leader like IMS has really helped us see that. And you've seen that we are trending just ahead of the national average. The new technology really helped utilize improved survey accuracy, taking some of that human factor out and utilizing more technology. Accurate condition index is very important to identifying the pavement needs, and the analysis needs generates recommended funding goals. The funding goal strategy has really been helpful because IMS doesn't just use national numbers on what it costs to improve a block. They sat down with our team, what's it cost to microsurface a block, what's it cost to reconstruct a block, and every other strategy that we use, so then they can apply that to their models and ultimately give us a good recommendation on if we are to increase our budget on street maintenance needs. The conclusion, it certainly is seen that the city's utilized a pavement management principles for a number of years, and now just reinforcing using technology to harness the next opportunity. We certainly have never adopted the worst first. You've always been very progressive on investing good money in good roads, but ultimately we every year reconstruct a number of blocks that are in that backlog, and we are this year as well. Ultimately, the study results said that over the 5-year period, we should be directing about an additional $3 million each year into pavement management, and we've studied our capital plan, and ultimately that will be our recommendation to you as it comes forward for your review and consideration, and also still meet our other objectives. And so you will see that we've took the analysis of IMS, and you'll see that our pavement management strategies have gone up. This year, we're affecting just under 700 blocks. Next year, if you approve that funding, we'll be up to about 840 blocks. In 2018, we'll be up to about 900 blocks a year. So you'll see a significant increase in pavement management, and we've talked about that in the incoming capital plan that you'll start to see very soon. And then last thing we just wanted to share is that pavement condition is not the only thing that drives the program. It's a critical piece, but we also look at utility condition, traffic volume, citizen feedback, safety, pedestrian ADA needs, and ride quality. And with that, our team is here to answer your questions. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Mark. This is something I've been looking forward to, as you know.
Yes.
And I have a number of questions that I probably want to ask, but I'm going to open it up to anyone else first. Any questions? Councilor Staley?
Could you tell me the percentage of streets that are 0 to 25, I'm not seeing it on here. Do you have like and also I'd like the percentage that are 25 to 50.
Yes, they're in those graphs, so we'll show you here.
It didn't look like it was going to be.
So,
Consultant, can you tell us what, I mean,
Zach, do you want to communicate? These are on this slide.
what that,
Okay, so in terms of the road 0 to 25, it's almost nil. I believe it was like 0.5 or 0.7%.
0.5, okay.
And the remaining backlog, so remember, backlog is everything below a PCI of 40, falls in the poor category between a 25 and 40. So there's
And
very
you
few.
had a 25 to 50 as a category as well.
No, backlog is everything below a PCI of 40.
But on the slides, you showed us 25 to 50. You showed us some cities that were 25 to 50. Yeah, on the pictures.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yes. On that slide, on those pictures of PCI, those were two descriptive terms that were merged together. So it was poor to marginal roads.
Okay.
That's why it shows.
All right, so the up to the 40 is what percent?
Correct. 40 and below. Yeah, correct.
What percentage?
That is 4%.
Okay, so what I would like to say to you, Mr. Cotter, is that I think the people who live in the core areas would think that doing worst first would be a fabulous thing. Attacking those photos you showed us, those are exactly what we're hearing, I think, from people when they're having deep concerns about their streets. So what I would want to ask is, what is our goal as a city to say that every street in that 0 to 25 up to the 40, every street will be addressed? Do we have like a game plan to say in 2 years? I just had a guy come up to me today and say he had been promised a street repair last year and then it just kind of disappeared.
So you've got to go down deeper into the details. So in some cases, you may see a street that's rated at a 35. And in that particular street that we can drive it, it may be what we call a frost boil in the middle of the street. And that's also been mapped. And a frost boil can be the size of a car or the size of a large vehicle. And that means that that's a partial reconstruction. And so that allows us to essentially go in and cut out that area. Could be a broken up area. And then we reconstruct that base and pavement. And then immediately that condition would go probably well above 50. In general, we've drove all the 4% streets. This year, our team has gone after a number of frost boil areas. Our team's also released one contract for it's about $250,000 for a contractor to do additional frost boil work, and then we're getting ready to release another contract because one of the things we've seen is many of these areas that scored low, they're partial reconstructions, and we can actually make a measurable change. We got a question earlier today is, can you give us a street that's in this backlog, and when would it be improved? And we talked about that we improve a number of these every year. And so if you go up on Duluth Avenue, 5th and Duluth, up by the cathedral, and then drive Duluth south 3 blocks, so those 3 streets are rated in this bucket, and they are scheduled for reconstruction in 2016. Another area you can drive that's already done is on 14th Street, just immediately east of Sunshine, near 14th and 2nd. Just drive immediately to the east. There's a horseshoe road, and there's 3 blocks. All that surface was already pulled out and reconstructed. So we do have a number of different strategies, and it's not just a full reconstruction. In some cases, we'll go in and do a microsurface that can improve that ride, and in some cases, take it out of that category. But just in general, we've looked at all the streets that are 40 and below, and we will be to all of them within the next 5 years. And until then, again, some of them are just potholes, some of those are frost boils, and ultimately some of those just need to get on the reconstruction list, and they're all prioritized, and so that's where we're at. So we feel great about the number. If anyone has any question about their street, they can call us, and specifically where these are at, the street team can give them some very good predictability. But clearly, our team believes that well within the 5-year range of the capital plan, everything that's today in the backlog will be addressed. But now you have to look at, there's marginal and fair, and you'll always have a degree of backlog streets. You always will. And so you always have to, that's why this year we're reconstructing Duluth. We've already reconstructed that one I mentioned. There's a number of streets that get reconstructed. So just don't, I would encourage you to not just focus on the worst first, because that's exactly what our third-party agency just told us. Because if you do that, you end up directing all your dollars to a very few blocks, and then you start to lose the big picture of what your entire street network is. And again, we've got nearly 800 miles. It's almost $1 billion asset. And having an aggressive pavement management strategy is key to keeping that at a 70 and not allowing it to go to a 69. Okay?
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Would you go one slide before that?
Sure.
You know, it's always unfortunate in South Dakota that our municipal elections happen during the spring, which is also pothole season in South Dakota.
That's right.
As you know, as a candidate over the last 8 years or so, it becomes the #1 topic when it comes to campaigning in municipalities in South Dakota, and so I kind of got drug into that as a candidate and thought, oh my gosh, these streets are awful. I want you to look at this chart very carefully. Anyone who travels outside of Sioux Falls sees this chart on a regular basis. If you drive in other communities, even just a little ways south of here, you'll see how much better Sioux Falls streets are. Mm-hmm. And now we have it in numbers. It's remarkable to me to see this chart and say, yep, knew that. Because some of us do get out of the city and get out and spend some time driving around other places. So I think, #1, we have to acknowledge we have really great streets, and I think we need to be grateful that we have figured out how to spend our money the right way when it comes to street preparation. But then the other side of that coin is those folks that, I mean, I looked at some of those pictures and went, yeah, that wouldn't have been a fair to me. That would have been a less than fair to me. So can you talk, Mark, about did this report surprise you in any way, and will it change how you, obviously we've said we're going to add $3 million to the CIP, and we're going to have that conversation here because we've got the sales tax numbers going down. Mm-hmm. But can you talk about how this report changes the way you look at that CIP, and are you looking at it and going, you know what, this street rated way higher than we thought, we're taking that one off the list and we're adding this one on because of this report? Can you talk about how it changed how you have looked at these numbers now?
Yes, first of all, thank you for the recognition that Sioux Falls does have good streets. You've got a team that attacks this on a daily basis. I'd say the one phrase that surprised me and it's kind of changed my mindset is reconstruction has to be the last step. And the reason we think about that is just very simply, you can microsurface a block for $3,000 a block. You can mill and overlay and improve any settled concrete or drainage ways for about $15,000 a block. And then you can reconstruct a block for about $100,000 a block. And I think one of the key things that I've heard our team say that IMS has said a number of times, and now I've started to really think about it is, all right, where are we reconstructing in 17? And is there any strategy we can do to extend that life another 3 years, 5 years, so we can maximize that pavement life and go after, instead of reconstructing one block for $100,000, can we go after and mill and overlay another 8 to 10 blocks somewhere else, another 35 blocks of microsurfacing? And that's probably been that phrase that I've really taken away. I think it's a great benchmark. It's the first time we've done a third party, but we also took the advice of the budget and said, let's take a fresh look at our capital plan. And we are fortunate that we have the large majority of the capital plan at about $35 million, and did move another $2.8 million into 17, and then we followed that suit through for the next for the remaining capital year.
If I might follow up, Mr. Chair.
You may have a follow-up. Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit more then, in terms of, I mean, we're really going to be looking at a kind of a different attitude about budgeting over the next couple of years with sales tax kind of flattening out a little bit. Mm-hmm. Talk about how, I mean, is 70 too high? You know, we've got some really great streets. Is 70 too high? Maybe we need to be be okay with, 65 maybe is okay. But talk about that for me.
Well, I think in some towns, 65 might be okay, not in our city. I mean, our expectation is high, whether we're patching potholes, improving roads, doing snow removal, and we all live here, so we all have, we had to have a base point. So this is our new base point. Now we financially go 70%. Are we comfortable with that? We're comfortable with that. The other factor that we looked at, just to raise it from a 70 to a 71, is almost another $13.5 million a year on top of what we're already doing. So we know that that's likely out of range, because that would, that would completely be a whole different strategy on how you'd fund streets. You'd have to go after a new revenue source. But the other side of it is, for just an additional 2.4, 2.5, really just over the course of the next 5 years, an additional $3 million a year can keep us at that steady state, maintains a backlog of 4% or less, and keeps our excellent streets. So I would say it's not too high. I would say it's our new expectation.
Thanks.
You heard Councilor Erpmack say that her street can be less than a 70, and that might be some savings that you could take to my street.
All right, the
I have
team's
a
here and they'll
smoking
note
hot
that.
street. Thanks,
Right.
Rex.
Okay. Councilor Kiley.
Thank you very much. And leave it on this slide, because
Okay.
I'd like to just kind of key off of some of what Councilor Erpenbach has already stated. When we take a look at this slide, in the areas where you'd like to be below, which is on the left-hand side, we are below and we're well below. And the areas where you'd like to be above the average is on the right-hand side, which we're exceeding that on average, which does demonstrate that our streets, contrary to what some individuals have stated this past election season, our streets are in good condition. And with the other point I want to make is this is not a subjective rating. It's not somebody driving around and just visually looking at the streets or basing it on a number of complaints that are phoned in or somebody doing a flyover. This is a very technology-intensive system that is employed that gives us very objective information that we can use again in the future as we move forward. And the fact that we recognize that we need to continue to invest $3 million a year over the next 5 years, I'll point out that that compounds. So that's not just a $15 million investment, but a $45 million investment as we're going forward. So we recognize we need to keep our streets in good condition. As a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee with the Sioux Falls Metropolitan Planning Organization, and now with the Urbanized Development Council as well, we've had presentations of this nature with utilizing this technology, because I believe that the county also utilized this same technology as well, which is a wise decision, investment of dollars on their part as well, because it does identify the areas where we can go in and get the biggest bang for our dollar now, versus concentrating just on the worst first, where it's 8 to 1, 8 times more expensive. And in the meantime, the good streets and the excellent streets are deteriorating to the point where it's now going to cost 8 times as much to revitalize them as well too. So that leads to that scenario where we're fighting a losing battle. Basically, we're attending the few and losing the majority in that case. And I would assume that when you do go into some of these areas where nobody would want to live on the street, that's going to be in that very poor. And without a complete recondition of the street or rebuild, which is very expensive, you can go in and at least help to bring that up into the fair category in the immediate future, with the intention of then focusing on greater improvements at a later point.
That's exactly right. You know, one case in point that just happened this week is 16th Street, that's immediately east of or west of Minnesota. It's an old concrete street. It was overlaid probably 10 years ago, and the overlay has started to peel off over time. We can go in there like we did just this week, put a 1-inch asphalt mat on there, improve that driving surface for those residents and people that use that street, and somewhat re-baseline that. That one is in the reconstruct category. We've designed it. It's coming through the queue, but we can do a 1-day improvement in some of those cases and make a measurable improvement. If I could just add one comment, I know during the election time we often hear the condition of the streets, and it is a factor of our climate. The commercial asphalt plants don't open until May 1st. They've got to have enough volume to actually open and pay those electrical demand charges. And so the strategy that we have to use between January and May is cold products and/or products that we reheat and do the best that we can to clean out those potholes and make improvements. But really, you don't get anything that's going to stick until it's 40 and rising, and you get a virgin asphalt material that has the ability to stick and stay. And so that's why every week after May 1st, you start to see a measurable improvements in our streets that have potholes because that material is actually staying.
I just wanted to finish up. I wasn't allowed to do so.
Yeah, one more.
Sorry.
Well, I wanted to yield the floor to Mr. Cotter because he had some good points to make there. But I do applaud you for using a very objective methodology.
Thank you.
To conduct this type of analysis and for utilizing the balanced approach and especially addressing the preventative side of our street construction process so that we get the biggest bang for our dollar. So good job.
You're welcome.
Nice report.
Councilor Nicer.
Are there, is this stuff in a report that's something that's consumable by the average person? That if I looked at it, I could see my streets and what my score was, or is it a big Excel spreadsheet?
It will be once we actually, we're still working through the draft report. But yes, I mean, it's like Councilor Kiley said, it's very objective. Every street segment has a number. And, it could be a 34, it could be an 84. And that information, again, if it's a surface defect, it may be a 34. We go out and do a frost boil and take it up to a 60. And so there's just it is a lot of data. I would also just tell you it's one point of data that we look at, and then we'll look at the condition of the utilities, traffic, citizen input, ADA barriers, any of those to actually identify where the construction program is for the year. But that information will be available.
Okay, great. Do you know do you have the ability to find out or have a projection of what a particular project will do? For example, you have a score, I'm assuming, for T. Ellis Road. Now, you just did a mastic application this last week. And so do you have any idea what the score moves to?
I personally don't, because I wouldn't know. I mean, I think we could probably ask Zach and say, if we were to go out there and treat all those thermal cracks, could we expect to see a 20% lift in that number? And I'm not sure if Zach, we haven't taken him out to T. Ellis, but we certainly could. In some cases, when you get the number, it's about 35% is the ride, because these vans also had the accelerometers on the vehicle, so they will test the ride of it, if you will. So 35% of the number is actually the ride of the road, and over 65% of the number is the fatigues, the cracks, the condition, the rutting, the bleeding, any of those aspects. And so, but it would certainly improve the ride aspect of that calculation.
Okay.
Councilor Silbert.
Thank you. Just a quick comment and question. This is an excellent report. Thank you very much for this. It really kind of makes it clear. So just so I'm clear on, this is done annually, this survey will be done, and each time they do it, they hit every street in town?
No, that's one of the things that we're going to work through, is that we funded the full city so we can get a baseline. Our initial approach is to every year drive half the city. Because what we used to do is, you have really three levels of roads. Locals, they're the ones you live on. The collectors are the ones that collect the neighborhood traffic and take them out to the arterial, and then you have the arterials. Our approach before was the arterials are like the arteries in your body. They carry all the traffic, and so we should look at those every year. The collectors are based on traffic volume, and then locals are about every 3 years. The large amount of centerline miles are really the residential streets. So we feel comfortable, at least in the near term, to budget for doing half the city at a time. We're still thinking about that. This analysis cost us just under $200,000 because we had to, not only, it was the first time, but we also asked for a full report to be wrote with it. Now when we have them come back, we don't necessarily need them to draft an entire report. We'll be updating the condition index numbers and probably updating the financial piece. And so we haven't gone out to the market to see what that would cost us to use IMS. The other thing with that is IMS used industry standards with the Army Corps of Engineers, so I mean, we're fortunate to work with them, but if we didn't have the opportunity to work with them on the next time, the next consultant could certainly utilize this as a base. And so right now we're thinking about every other year, half the city.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Well, first of all, let me respond that I was one of those candidates, and as we were out talking to people, roads come up a lot. So the road in front of my street is very nice, but apparently some people are driving on roads that are not up to the par of what they'd like them to be. So I didn't make that up. That's just what I'm hearing from people, and I do travel outside of town. I've traveled extensively in the surrounding states. So I do appreciate the quality of our streets, Mr. Cotter.
Okay.
But I think it would be, I would be very proud to say in our community that we do not have any roads that fall from 0 to 25 and even 0 to 40. And I would say as we move forward with funding, I am going to be working to put more money into taking care of those streets. So we could say we are a community that doesn't have anything that is very poor, like those pictures we saw. I think we need to eliminate those for our citizens. Okay, just wanted to tell you that.
Certainly, and I will tell you that I would be counter to that because we've got professionals that have advised us, and again, going after the worst first concentrates all your dollars in a very few amount of blocks. And again, it's based on diving into the details and understanding what is the condition of a particular road and what's the strategy that we need to do. And so, again, I would, it's a benchmark, right? But ultimately, the people that advise agencies across the country are saying, have a goal to, where we're at 4 is much in advance of most agencies across the country. We're a third of what the benchmark should be. We want to take those dollars and continue to reconstruct them as they get prioritized and come through, but to not recommend going after all those. They will all be touched in the next 5-year period of time, and that's a reasonable approach based on the length of a life of a road, but also concentrating a significant amount on our good roads with the right treatment.
Councilor Neisert, you had one more?
No, I'm
okay?
fine, thank you. Yep, it's answered.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I do a quick question?
certainly may.
Please. Mark, I love what we've done with this. We've got a good view of the above the ground where we're at. How do we balance that with getting the sewer work done at the same time, or the water things that go with that with the increased budgets? Because there's going to be streets that we're not going to be able to do because we're not ready to do the underground, or the underground drives similar to what you were talking about earlier this afternoon. So
Right.
How do we balance increased funding for making the roads better and doing that at the same time? Is there an objective measure of what we're doing beneath the surface?
So we've got Wes Phillips here, and he's the principal street engineer, but there's also equivalent principals in water and wastewater, and they're constantly looking at those and layering up, okay, we've got a priority sanitary sewer here, we've got a priority water here, we've got a priority pavement here. The ideal is to try to mesh as many of those as you can together, because then you're only disrupting the street and the property owners minimally. There are strategies just north of the police station is on Dakota. We've delayed that street to rehabilitate that sewer for probably 5 years because the condition of the road, we still wanted to get more life out of it. And so we asked the sewer team, keep an eye on it. And ultimately, when we can bring the two together, we'll start to reconstruct that. We'll reconstruct Dakota Avenue between Russell and, I believe it's 3rd, over about a 3-year period of time. And so they're constantly working through those issues. If it's a small sewer collection issue, those are fairly minor. We've got some low-impact trenchless technologies. We can go in and make either a long-term or a short-term repair. Same with water. And so I wanted to give you the reassurance that the principal engineers are working together all the time. Underneath the city engineers, two assistant city engineers, and this is what they do every day. And so in some cases, we do want to delay a reconstruction because we want to, in that case on Dakota, wanted to get another 5 years out of that pavement life. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, just one comment or two comments if I could. I wanted to thank you because I've not worked with you, but I want to thank you for putting this together because, you know, I kind of asked for it and you were 3 steps ahead of me like usual. And we appreciate your work, Josh, and the way this was done in a very professional manner because it's objective. I mean, we don't have to worry about what it is. And I also point out that, you know, looking at this so we don't do the worst first is the least expensive way to do it in over 5 years. Everything will be taken care of in 5 years or 3 years, was it?
That's right. What's currently in the backlog, and we'll address those, but just know that there will be others that go into the backlog. It's inevitably. That's right, exactly right.
Eventually, we'll kind of get out of that, and we also got to look at the dollars, and the dollars say the way that you're planning on doing it makes some sense. So thank you very much. And the graph here, you know, the graph, the one big graph that you got here, I got a little note here. It says, Cotter must be pitching for a pay increase. No, not really.
It's a very simple graph.
Keeping track of the roads so well for us.
Well, the IMS team, along with the engineering and streets team, have done a fantastic job. Work goes out to them, and so. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Okay, our next agenda item is Railroad Development Project. Mike Cooper.
Again, Mike Cooper, Planning and Building Services, and I'm not going to be using any of these visual displays, but
aren't you?
Appreciate the chance to follow up with Mr. Cotter's presentation. Aaron Bolfenkamp is our project manager for this particular initiative of the city, and there's some other members of the team today that we'll call on. We wanted to give you a brief update today as far as where we're at with our rail yard redevelopment.
You got your clicker. Here it is.
There, in front of me. And we expect that we'll be coming back to you on a fairly regular basis as we go forward with this. We've established a number of project goals early on with the rail yard redevelopment project. Number one is to provide opportunities for redevelopment of the downtown rail yard property as well as adjacent land. We want to look at providing opportunities for living, working, and playing within our downtown. We've had some great additions to the downtown environment in recent years with redevelopment projects with the River Greenway, and we want to continue that with this project. We'd like to promote sustainable development, and then finally we want to fulfill commitments that were made in purchasing the property as well as going through the environmental assessment. So just as a recap, the downtown property that we're talking about extends north of 6th Street and south of 8th Street. The area in yellow comprises of just over 10 acres. We have the 6th Street right-of-way and the 8th Street right-of-way. Up at the north end, it's just east of the Killian building, which now is being taken over by Lutheran Social Services. In the middle, we have Sharapa Place to the west, and then south of 8th Street to the west is the 8th and Railroad Center. You'll notice in the middle there's a building that's highlighted. That's proposed to be removed as part of our project going forward. The existing depot building south of 8th Street will continue to be owned and utilized by Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad as an office space. And one of the things that we'll continue to emphasize with this project is that there will continue to be trains extending through this property on the very eastern edge. There will continue to be main traffic lines that will accommodate railroad cars going through the downtown area. What's being removed are the switching tracks, and that's what we're proposing to look at redeveloping. We've done a number of tasks already up to now, going back to 2001 when the original feasibility study was conducted, of not only looking at the downtown rail yard, but also looking at other separation projects throughout the city, grade separation projects to get the railroad traffic and the vehicle traffic separated for safety purposes. In 2005, the funds were appropriated to acquire the downtown rail yard site. It took us a long time to go through the requirements of the environmental assessment. That was completed in 2014. We closed on the property last year. And now Burlington Northern Santa Fe is beginning one of the next steps in their process, which is to construct some new siding tract out on East Rice Street. So that's where we're at as of today, but we have some more exciting steps to move forward. And one of those is to look at coming up with a better, stronger concept plan of what would we like to see that downtown 10 acres become in the future. What's the vision? What's the dream of what's reality for that property? We've gone through a competitive selection process, and our intent is to award a contract of about $25,000 to a firm based out of Omaha, Nebraska called RDG. They also have offices in Des Moines and Florida. They specialize in urban design projects throughout the Midwest. They've done things in Sioux Falls. They've done projects in Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And through that selection process, we believe that they're the best firm to give us kind of an outside perspective of what's the best concept for this rail yard property. Tasking them with engaging the public locally, looking at what we've already put together in terms of greenway master plans, our downtown development plan, other ideas that property owners, developers locally have talked about, and really coming up with an implementation strategy. In other words, we've got 10 acres. Are we going to divide that up into multiple sites, multiple development projects? What's the best way to move that forward and look at what the market of Sioux Falls, South Dakota is compared to other places in the Midwest and even nationwide? And then assist us in executing that implement strategy going forward through completion. Starting this summer, that should be the summer of 2016, there's some current activity that we'll be talking about, and I want to bring up now Diane Best to give you an idea of some of the other steps that we're working on now as far as the downtown property itself. She's right there.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to remain seated. My name is Diane Best. I'm an assistant city attorney. I have been assisting this team on this project since 2014. I last talked to the council about this purchase of 10 acres. Are we okay? Okay. I last talked to the council about this purchase almost a year ago. At that time, I was involved in explaining the city's contemplated purchase of the 10 acres and the fact that including the fact that the BNSF was selling its interest by means of a quitclaim deed. That and other legal terms were matters that I appeared before the council about. In particular, quitclaim deeds are used by the railroad industry in South Dakota and elsewhere when a conveyance of property is made. And in making the purchase under a quitclaim deed, the buyer must examine property records and verify the seller has good and sufficient title. And that is where I and the city attorney's office were involved. That due diligence was made. The council approved the purchase, and of course the city now owns the property. To the extent any lands are sold for redevelopment, the next step is to ask a judge to quiet title. We touched on that process very briefly last year when I talked to the council. The process is a fairly routine process. It does occur in land transactions frequently. The process includes making advertisement to the public, So the judge is satisfied that there are no stray claims to the property. It also involves notice to abutting property owners. And in that situation, we've already reached out to those abutting property owners, and we're working through that process. And really, I'm just here to tell you that that process will continue. It's a fairly routine matter, and it will be occurring over the next several months as we prepare for redevelopment. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure why I lost my slide, but I'll continue on if somebody can help bring that back up. The next bullet point that we had was finalized development concept. And again, with RDG, the firm that we're going to bring in as our consultant, they'll probably spend the summer about 45 days or so going through their process of collecting information about Sioux Falls, about the rail yard, about downtown, engaging the public with workshops, open houses, and then presenting a final report to the city council of what their recommendations are going to be as far as the concept plan as well as an implementation strategy. Then this fall, we would hope to begin the second stage, which is going out with RFPs. If we have a plan of how we want to go forward with marketing the downtown property and what the vision is going to be. I'm sorry, there we go. We want to actually begin potentially going out with our first request for proposal yet this fall for redevelopment. RDG would remain under contract with us to help put that RFP together and also help us with the selection process. One of the other advantages of having an outside perspective is that I think it opens up the door for a lot of the local firms and developers and design people to team up with those ideas that they want to bring forward. But it doesn't preclude anybody, obviously, from outside of Sioux Falls in responding as well. And then the rail yard is expected to be vacated by Burlington Santa Fe by the fall of 2017. And so as we go into the winter of 2017 and 2018, there's a number of steps that we want to do in terms of preparing the rail yard for redevelopment with the idea of potentially having that initial groundbreaking by winter or spring of 2018. And I want to bring up Josh Peterson to help explain to you some of the steps that we'll be going through in terms of preparing the rail yard for redevelopment. Josh?
Good afternoon. Josh Peterson. I'm a principal engineer with City Engineering. BNSF is, like Mike said, is working on constructing the siding tracks out along Rice Street right now. They expect to complete that this year, and then they also have some construction next year of a connection track downtown that they got to take care of before they can move their operations out of the existing rail yard. So once they do that, then we can do some things to get it ready for redevelopment. As Diane said, they sold it to us through a quick claim. They sold it to us as is. Their BNSF is going to remove their rail cars that they got on there and some stockpiled materials, but they're not removing the tracks or anything like that. That's going to be ours to own, and we're going to want to remove that to get it ready for developers. We're not going to turn that burden over to them. So we'll be doing that. We'll be removing the existing rail lines that are there. 6th and 8th Street, the crossings that are no longer needed, we'll want to take those out and put paving back in there to get the nice smooth ride on those streets. That freight house building between 6th and 8th Street that was shown on the map of the property, we're going to remove that as well. We'll mitigate some soil off the site. Just some general things to clean up the yard so it is ready for redevelopment. So.
Don't go too far away. So again, very, very quick update, but we will come back as we continue on through this process, and particularly as we go through the summer with that public engagement process of developing the concept, ideas and plans for downtown. I think that's going to be a pretty exciting aspect of how this continues to move forward. So with that, if you have any questions of our presenters.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Thank all of you. I appreciate that. It's an exciting time to be listening to all this. Mike, can you go back to the slide about the RFP timeline? And maybe because of the typo, I was already this fall, there will be RFPs going out, and what will those be for?
Yeah, this summer, RDG will be engaged to develop the concept plan and the framework and talk about how it could be phased in terms of redevelopment. So assuming that happens this summer, we would like to potentially go out with at least one request for proposal yet this fall with that initial phase of redevelopment.
For actual redevelopment, RFP?
Yes,
Wow.
because we don't want to wait until the winter of 2018 and then start the RFP process. We want to kind of have a project ready to go, shovel ready, as they say, so that as soon as the site is available for redevelopment, we can have that groundbreaking.
Wow. That
Because
seems-
people are already talking to us with ideas and with questions about the timeline of how quickly it can begin.
Okay, awesome. If I could just.
You may have one more.
One other, thank you. So, and I think I know the answer to this, but I need to hear it out loud. What do we think those costs will be for removing the, all the lines that are there, taking that building down, some soil remediation, those things that Josh was talking about? Do you have a guess, or is this something that comes after RDG is here?
We've put together some very high-level estimating just to kind of give us a ballpark of what we're looking at, and around $2.5 million is what we're looking at for that preparation of the site. A couple things about that. We did not expend all of the earmark funds when we purchased the yard. We are working with DOT and Federal Highway to see if there's an opportunity for us to utilize some of that in the preparation. I think we'll expect to have more information on that in the next few months as we work through that with them. But it is an opportunity we are exploring, because we'd like to see that money used here in Sioux Falls and not go out of town.
Good, thank you.
And we'll also be able to come with some. We're reaching out to some experts in the type of work that we're doing, so we'll hopefully have some better, solid estimates of that work down the road as well.
Great.
Councilor Neisert.
Josh, this is probably for you. With 2 remaining tracks, one of the questions that's come up is, since we're removing tracks, will the pattern or volume of rail traffic, is that expected to increase, decrease, stay the same downtown? And then also, is there any projected impact in the same way, like by Avera and 26 and Southeastern? Are things going to move? Are we going to see more traffic?
Sure, that's a great question. And we actually did evaluate this in the environmental assessment process a few years ago, and there is some documentation in the appendix of that. It's a long document. I recognize not everybody has read through it, so I'm happy to kind of summarize it. And what the big change is we're taking the benefit of these new siding tracks that are going to be constructed out along Rice Street. Those tracks are going to be used for storing rail cars and interchanging cars between BNSF and Ellis and Eastern Railroad. BNSF generally takes cars into town from outside vendors for delivery to Sioux Falls businesses, and then Ellis and Eastern delivers them to a number of the businesses in town. So that currently is happening in the downtown yard. So these long unit trains of about 50 cars are coming into downtown, and they're being stored there until they can be picked up by Ellis and Eastern to be delivered to the customers. And then when the customers are done with them, they come back in, they build up those unit trains and come out. With 6th and 8th Street there, you don't have room for 50 cars on one track, so they're constantly breaking those up and building those trains as needed, whether they're delivering to customers or preparing to take them out of town. So that's going to be probably the biggest benefit we're going to see, is all of that operations that routinely blocks 6th and 8th Street is going to be gone. Those new siding tracks are long enough and that they'll be able to do all that operations without impacting any streets. So what you'll see is the line that runs along Rice Street into the downtown yard
will carry the same number of cars, but what you'll see, instead of these long unit trains coming into town, you'll see more frequent but shorter trains that are being delivered and picked up from customers. So those are the big changes. We're not impacting the volumes at all, just the form of the trains, so to speak, or the size and frequency of the trains. And all the other rail lines in town are not really going to be affected at all with this project.
Thank you. Councilor Starr.
Thank you. More for Director Cooper, probably. Josh. Taking a look at this really aggressive design concept and development, it just seems difficult in 45 days for RDG to, or whoever we award the contract to complete their deliverables and do a good job of public input, whether it's workshops and public meetings and things in that 45 days. I think I've heard from several constituents who are interested in how much of this area is going to be public space, and does that fall back to the developers, to whether it's a park or ice skating rinks, I think was one of the concepts that people have been talking about, whether it's in different areas and things. Are we, part of this process, I guess, is deciding whether we reserve some of this space for additional park or public space, I guess is maybe a better way of doing that, and then we're relying strictly on the RFPs when the developers come back to include those type of things in their plans, and then citizens would have to get in contact with multiple people if we get multiple follow-up from the RFPs.
Sure. Okay, I'll start out with the timeline. I think the timeline is very realistic. Again, we're hiring a firm that's done this in other communities. They have a really good idea of the number of hours that it takes to start the process, because we're really giving them a lot of data to start out with. We're giving them what's happening with the downtown greenway, with the downtown. Through the environmental assessment of the rail yard, we put together some conceptual ideas of what could happen. So they're going to start out with a lot of existing information that's going to get them started pretty aggressively. And then going through the public input is, there's a pretty standard process of how they do that. And again, they've done this many times around the area, and I think they're going to do a good quality job. But yes, through that process, it will tell us, are there public spaces that maybe are desirable to utilize with this redevelopment? How does it tie into the greenway? How does it tie into the rest of the downtown? And really, what is the market for redevelopment in Sioux Falls? How does that compare with downtown Des Moines or Minneapolis or Omaha? What are some realistic ideas of what could happen? And what is the community saying that they would like to see downtown? So I think they're going to do a really good job of pulling all that data together and bringing it forward as a final piece that we can look at and say, here's our vision, here's what we think would be a great idea of what this rail yard is going to become, and then how do we start to put that vision together in terms of the implementation. So again, is it realistic to say that we're going to put out an RFP for all 10 acres? I would say probably not. But based on the concept framework, how do you divide it up into chunks of redevelopment land? And that, I think that's going to come out pretty well through that public process again. So,
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Sure.
Anytime a contract's awarded outside of Sioux Falls, naturally a question comes up at some point. Why was it outside of Sioux Falls? I'd heard that maybe this company in particular, as you'd said, was good at this specific type of project. Is that what it was?
Yes. I mean, it was a competitive process. One of the firms that did respond included some local people, but we have worked with them before in other projects in Sioux Falls. That's not the only reason that they were selected, but they were really selected based on the approach that they bring to the public input of addressing what the market is and then helping us with the RFP and the RFP selection process, because they're going to help us analyze these development proposals that we get going forward and helping us put together the final recommendations that would ultimately come to the City Council for approval. We're also going to be engaging you know, other departments, including the Economic Development Division of Community Development, obviously attorneys, public works, finance. So there's going to be a lot of people that will have their hands on this process as it moves forward.
Okay. Oh, okay, Councilman Nicer.
Just sort of one more. Do you know if is there any development constraints or maybe regulations as far as what can go adjacent to a railroad? I mean, I have no idea. Besides a railroad right of way, can you put, you know, apartments, or is there?
There's going to be a part of this process of looking at the development framework is that there's going to be an overlay district established on this land so that people understand, based on your earlier question, there's still going to be railroad trains going through the site. We also are going to be working through the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, and letting them review some of the historic character of the area that it still fits in with that. So there are going to be some design standards that we do come up with that will say, here's what's our appropriate land uses for this area.
Can I do one more? And then I guess the only other thing that occurs to me is there any whistles blowing down there, and is there going to be an addition of some sort of, you know, the crossing arm so that you wouldn't have that noise next to our new development?
Yeah, we'll let Josh take that one more time. Talk about what the initial improvements will be to 6th and 8th Street, and then maybe more long-term what we're talking about.
Sure. As part of this project right now, there's still going to be, like I said, those 2 mainline tracks that cross 6th and 8th Street. So we're going to continue to have the crossing arms with the bells on them, and the train's going to have to blow the whistles. Those are federal requirements. Some interest has been brought up, and it's been something we've kept separate from the project in the past because of the federal money. We didn't want to expand the scope to where it became difficult to manage, but something we're just beginning to evaluate now is the potential of doing quiet zones in Sioux Falls, which is something that's new to our office, so we're still trying to get our hands around exactly what that process is. We're reaching out to some experts that have dealt with this in other areas. But initially, or in summary, what it is if you go through evaluation process to identify the potential to take a corridor of rail line and remove all the crossings with street traffic, or creating physical barriers to where there's no chance for a car or pedestrian to enter a tracks when a train is coming. So if you can make one of those 2 requirements happen, then you can designate the corridor a quiet zone to where the train doesn't have to blow their whistle as they come up to those streets and as they cross them. Now, it can be a little bit of a misnomer there, a quiet zone, because there's still the potential. I mean, it's safety first. If they suspect anybody's on that street, they're going to blow their whistle, or, you know, they're going to make sure that they're doing everything they can to not hit somebody. And then also, if you have the crossing still there and you're creating that physical barrier, usually what that means is a double mast arm that's coming across the street and potentially a sidewalk to be that physical barrier. As you do that, you're still going to have the bells on that crossing to notify cars that they need to stop. So there's still potential for sound there, but it is reduced from what you would see on a crossing that doesn't have those features. So it is something we're definitely looking at. From my initial information I've received about this, it is a long and complex process. It's not something we're going to be, you know, implementing in the next year, maybe even year 2, but it is something we want to study, and because some of it is designated by the federal government through the Federal Rail Association, you know, we need to work with them and see, you know, what's their criteria and how can we best implement that. But yes, that's a lot of interest we've gotten from the public on pursuing that, so we're definitely looking into that and hopefully be able to bring some more information forward in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. As we know, working with the railroad, nothing goes very fast.
Thank you, Council.
The Land Use Committee will start in 10 minutes at 5 minutes to 6. Meeting is adjourned.